So at GrowthPoint, we're starting to see a lot of change in supply chain technology, and a lot of investors are asking us what's going on, what should we invest in, what's exciting about the supply chain. And all of this is in the context of deglobalization, where a lot of countries are wanting to do manufacturing onshore, and they don't want the risk that they experienced during COVID of being short on certain critical supplies in order to manufacture something. So for example, if you're Ford or General Motors and you're manufacturing cars and suddenly you run out of a particularly critical supply or part, then you have to change the whole manufacturing line from making one type of car to another type of car, and that's extremely expensive. Or you get manufacturing line downtime, which is even more expensive. What we're seeing in supply chain is just the deployment of a lot of tracking technology and a lot of integration of the data around the supply chain into the manufacturing processes. And to start off with, it began with a lot of deployment of sensors. So sensors in containers, sensors attached to valuable items that are in the shipping process, whether it be on boats, planes, trucks, or trains. The items are moving, and the sensors are broadcasting their GPS position to data networks that track those items. So for example, if you're Applied Materials or ASML, you're shipping very complicated semiconductor manufacturing technology to Taiwan, and you want to make sure it doesn't suffer extreme temperature change, or it doesn't have a sudden impact or go missing or anything like that. Well, you want to track these parts, say there's 35 of them in a particular product, until they actually arrive at their destination. And then literally as soon as they arrive at their destination, the sensors all say, hey, all 35 parts are here, and you can recognize revenue because that particular item showed up. And so sensors are being deployed to detect humidity, to detect certain geolocations, as a way for not only the consumers of that technology, so in the case of General Motors or Ford, to know whether they've got the inbound logistics operational and they're going to get all their parts so they can keep manufacturing that product, but also for the end dealers to know, hey, where is my car? So if you've bought an expensive car and you want to know where it is, using these sensors, the dealers can actually find out, oh, it's on this train, it arrives at this way station, you can have it 2 days from now. And so a lot of sensors are being deployed throughout the supply chain, and that sensor data is being transmitted to the networks of the manufacturers and to the software companies that track those sensors. Well, not only do those sensors provide critical information, but the data that they're being provided is being tracked by people that are comparing the amount of tariffs or the amount of freight that's being paid to move those supplies. So for example, in order to avoid suddenly flying in parts to make a product, you want to know, if you know your parts are only 2 days away, then you won't suddenly fly in some parts overnight, because you know you're going to get those parts in 2 days. Whereas before this technology, you would probably pay serious freight charges to fly in parts because you weren't sure your parts were going to arrive in 2 days' time. And there's a couple of big companies in that space. In the sensor space, a company called Interlight comes to mind that does these very specialized sensors. In the area of tracking shipments, you'll hear of a company called Project 44 or another one called 4Kites, where they sort of track the movements from A to B of different parts. But one of the companies we're most excited about is a company called Freight Verify. What Freight Verify does is rare, is it takes all the enterprise data and integrates it with all the external logistics and telematics data through a way of A, mapping locations, and B, having a model that can canonically map different supply chains onto a standard model for managing all the inbound logistics and downstream aftermarket type of activity, and really managing all of that supply chain to a really critical just-in-time type of set of processes that can help eliminate and remove and reduce the amount of inventory and waste and excess inventory in the system. There's another category of supply chain data that's interesting, and a good example of this is a company called Resolink, What Resolink does is it tracks all the news around the world and all the catastrophes that happen, like fires and earthquakes and hurricanes and tornadoes and labor shortages or strikes, lots of kind of events that can be catastrophic to the supply chain, and it analyzes their customers' vendors, first, second, third, fourth tier supply chain vendors, and it will identify to that ultimate manufacturer, hey, this really important part that you get made in this particular country, well, they just had an earthquake. Or this particular part that gets made in this particular factory, well, they're on strike. And it allows the procurement and purchasing groups in those large companies to mitigate the risk to their supply chain by making the appropriate calls or identifying the appropriate replacement parts or substitute parts that they can find from another supplier, and therefore mitigate the risk of downtime or very expensive high-cost freight by shipping in these parts, at short notice. So there's a few of the supply chain areas that GrowthPoint is excited about and investors are asking about and that we're working in.